Monster Dahmer, the Jeffrey Dahmer. They really labeled this thing weird. It's Dahmer Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. What a weird title. They should have did better than that. But anyways, yeah, guys, this comes from, what is the name of the creator? Ryan Murphy, who did American Horror Story, I think, and some other stuff that I can't remember. But yeah, this is the I don't know how you want to call it, the dramatization miniseries of the Jeffrey Dahmer story. Something that I've watched this show before. I've talked about this on my channel back when it came out in 2022. With me getting a Netflix subscription, for some reason I wanted to watch this again. I can't really say why I wanted to watch this again, particularly since it's not something that's really rewatchable. I've talked about true crime and serial killers on this podcast, or on this channel, many different times. So I do just have a little bit of a fascination with serial killers. I just kind of like trying to pick through the brain, essentially, and try to figure out what caused people to do these crazy things. And when I saw this back in 2022, I thought it was done really well. I had some issues with it, issues that I will talk about here in a second, issues that I still have with this show. But I found it to be done well, I will say that. Dahmer is just someone that I am particularly interested in, I guess, in the sense because I'm from Wisconsin. I have been to these locations. I have been to the Ambassador Hotel. I have walked past some of these bars that Dahmer visited. I have walked by where he lived. So, I mean, and not even because I wanted to go find these locations, just because I was in Milwaukee. So that right there, it's just fascinating to me. So yeah, it's just a case that absolutely fascinates me. And just what all went down afterwards, and how many times he should have been caught, and his change essentially once he got into prison, his just everything that went on with this case is just so interesting. So yeah, Evan Peters does such a great job as Dahmer. Things that you did see of him as far as actual videos and stuff like that, he seems to embody Dahmer quite well. As well as Richard Jenkins, that's his name, right? Oh, it doesn't say. Richard Jenkins, I believe his name is. He is great as Lionel Dahmer. Again, you watch videos of actual Lionel Dahmer. He did such a great job. Molly Ringwald is Sherry Dahmer. So yeah, all the acting across the board is done really well in this show. Let's talk the character of Glenn Cleveland here, because this is the big problem a lot of people had. This is a problem that I somewhat have with this show. Glenda was someone that very much did complain about Dahmer. She was not his next door neighbor, the way it showed in this miniseries. She lived in an entirely different building, but still did call. There is an actual phone call. I believe it's the end of episode 2. That is her actual phone call. So she very much did complain about Dahmer and such like that, but not in the way that this show shows it. So it is an inaccuracy, but the thing is, they've combined many different people. Pamela Bass, yeah, I'm trying to think who else. I can't remember the actual names of the other people living there. There were many different neighbors that were complaining about Dahmer. And so, for me, I understand. I understand you don't want to have 16 different people that you see for one scene. in this 10 episode series. It makes sense to combine it all into one. I completely understood why they did that. And there are 100% inaccuracies with things that happen with her. I will say that. And some of them I'm okay with. Certain things I'm not okay with. And, you know, there's certain things that have been said by the neighbors that some of them, you know, like, for example, Pamela Bass, she did say that Dahmer gave her what she thinks was human meat. Her husband says no, that never happened. Jeff never brought us any kind of food, period. And that makes more sense to me, especially like if you watch some of these like home videos of Dahmer. He always talked about how he ate at McDonald's and stuff like that a lot. He did also admit that he did eat some of his victims, but again, he didn't seem like the type that cooked at home a lot. So for me, that thing is just very much a dramatization. It's effective. I will say that in this show, it's effective. I will also say this as far as, you know, realism and such like that. They definitely did not film this in Wisconsin. They definitely filmed this in, you know, California, because the streets look nothing like Wisconsin. The hotel looks nothing like the Ambassador. You know, the actual Oxford apartments looked nothing like what they do in the show. So, I mean, this is not the most accurate thing in the world. It's not a documentary, though. It is a miniseries, and I completely understand that. It gets a lot of things correct, and I appreciate it for that. I think this is something I believe I talked about when I talked about it back in 2022. The most effective episode in this is episode 6 or 7, and it focuses on one of the victims, Tony Hughes, I believe his name was, and it's my favorite episode, and it's because it focuses on Tony Hughes. I think this would have been a great series if they had focused on the victims. If they went and took us through the day in the life of that victim leading up to Dahmer. I think part of the reason why this doesn't fully work is because we focus so much on Dahmer. I don't think that needed to be done. We've seen that with other things that have came out. We kind of know a lot of this. This is, you know, pretty general knowledge to a lot of people. And some of it just kind of feels out of place. And it does, you know, this was a very controversial show. And I understand why. It does feel like we are, you know, giving more attention to Dahmer, which the show's called Dahmer, than we are the victims. And it's really weird that the ending of this show is very much, we need to remember the victims. We need to remember the victims. And it shows the victims, but the show's all about Dahmer. You know, going through the show, you don't know. I'll be honest, I know three of the victims' names. You know, they're not important characters in this. Some of them literally just show up and they're gone. So it's just strange how much they're really putting Glenda Cleveland in it, which I think having that perspective is great with Glenda Cleveland, because we are seeing, you know, the trauma, the anger, the pain that goes through with that. But we also spend so much time, like, the victims, we have to remember the victims, this, that, but it's so much focused on Dahmer. That's why I just think it would have been great to have the show been through the perspective, essentially, of the victims. And I think it would have been less controversial as well, because we are remembering the victims, we're making the victims our characters here, and not putting so much focus on Dahmer. So yeah, I think that really could have been interesting. And I understand why they didn't do that, but for me, I think that would make a more interesting show if you go through the victim's perspective of what happened these days, those days. Like I said, I think that episode with Tony Hughes is my favorite. And it's the only episode really that it has the perspective of that, of through the victim. Everything else is all through Dahmer. And it just, I don't understand why they decided to do that. I think it was because he was deaf. It felt strange to me. But yeah, and I just, again, more than anything, I just find Dahmer's story so interesting with what his mother was doing as far as medication while she was pregnant with him, as far as what kind of mother she was, as far as what kind of father he had. And the question always is could this have been prevented? If his mother maybe didn't take pills, would this have been stopped? If his mother, had been there, would this have been stopped? If Lionel had, paid more attention to his son and not ignored these signs, could this have been prevented? It's a really interesting thing. And then just, as soon as he went, as soon as he got arrested, he said, "For what I did, I should be dead." The fact that he seemed to have like a switch, essentially, that just kind of got turned off, and he went, "What have I done?" That is really interesting. And just some of the interviews he did from prison were just, it's fascinating. It is interesting to know if he actually did feel terrible for what he did. Something that also is shown in this is like the fan mail and stuff like that, and the fact that he kind of uses his celebrity. That's something that makes me go, no, you don't care that you did all these things. Of course, we're never gonna know now. He's gone, but it is an interesting perspective of, did he actually realize that he did horrible things, and did he hate himself for it? Did he actually, become a actual born-again Christian and really decide to change his ways? Again, we'll never know, but that is something that is definitely interesting. Something that also that this show does is it very much brings out other serial killers. For some moments, it does make sense, but then there's also moments where it just feels like you're just trying to put in more serial killers. It brings up Ed Gein, which it makes sense that they would talk about him when talking about, the court case and how he could, plead insanity and such like that. But they have to show stuff. They show Ed Gein's house. They show the shed. We don't need to see that. Tell us about it. Don't show us it. There is a lot of John Wayne Gacy in the last episode. It literally opens with John Wayne Gacy. Is it interesting that there is that connection of, essentially John Wayne Gacy, being caught and, being executed, I guess you could say, lethal injection, at the same time as this Dahmer stuff? Yes, that is interesting, but it focuses a lot on it. And it is interesting that he was killed the same day that Jeffrey Dahmer was baptized. It is interesting that there was the solar eclipse going on and such like that. So I'm not going to deny that's interesting, but it feels very much just tacked on into this show. And it just feels like we want to add in serial killers. So yeah, that's something that bugs me a little bit too. I will also say there's a lot of just time changes, and certain ones make sense. You do want to flash back to the past because his first murder happened when he was 18 years old. Stephen Hicks, I want to say his name was. So yeah, it makes sense to flash back, But then there's also moments where it just flashes back to things that we've already seen. Um, and it doesn't always make sense. So the show is messy. It is a little bit all over the place. All in all, though, if you are you don't know about the Dahmer story, if you want to see a dramatization of it, this is something somewhat informative to watch. There are lots of good information in here that are correct. There's also things in here that are incorrect. So it is a good thing to watch and then go back and look, do your research on and see what actually is false, what is actually true. But a lot of things are done right. A lot of the victims with the court case thing, they accurately recreate some of those moments. But yeah, there's also a lot of things that they get wrong. But all in all, this is a show that I don't know why I wanted to watch it again. This is not a show to rewatch. So, yeah, I don't know. Sometimes Cody just gets interested in serial killer stuff. I don't know why. So yeah, the show, I gave it like a 7 out of 10. It's not absolutely incredible. It is very interesting stuff, and it does have a lot of great information as well. Something I did not realize, Reverend, what was his name? James something. A guy who came to Milwaukee during the time to very much, fight for the neighborhood's rights and such like that, is actually from Greenville, where I'm living now. So I did not know that. He was also marched with Martin Luther King with Selma and stuff like that, which is funny that I just watched Rustin. So I wonder if he's actually in that movie, and I didn't connect that to this. But yeah, okay, I'm rambling on. So yeah, I hope you guys have yourself a great night. Don't do anything I wouldn't do, including watching Dahmer for a second time, because this is not something to rewatch. I'm losing my ding-ding mind. You guys have yourself a good night. We'll see you next time.